Okay, welcome to this conference call on the WASH ERU Technical Working Group. This is a call that we organized, or we plan to organize after the last technical working group meeting in person in Madrid. We just wanted a catch-up call to see how we were doing with action points, and also particularly with the large operations that are underway. I'll do a quick rundown of who's on the call. Some may join as the call proceeds. So we have on the line Raquel from Spanish Red Cross. I always go in clockwise geographical order, starting with Spain. Raquel from Spanish Red Cross, Charles from the French Red Cross, Deborah and Claire from the British Red Cross. We've got 3 people from the Geneva WASH team. Uli Jaspers, the team leader, myself and Rhea. Sarah Davies, our regional WASH coordinator in Kuala Lumpur. Is there anyone else on the call that I can't see on my screen? Okay, those who are on the call, if you can mute your microphone when you're not speaking, that will just help with the sound clarity. I just put in the chat box a link to the Google Doc. So I'm just seeing a message from Marcus that he's not able to get his microphone to work, but he will listen in. Okay, good. Thanks Marcus for joining. No comments on whether or not that was intentional on our part, whether we muted you. So just a reminder, there is the Google Doc where we have the very short agenda and a link to the different documents that we had in Madrid and the action points. Just a reminder on the, and so if for those of you who have called in, I think Deborah and Claire are on the phone, that link should have been in the email that I sent last week about this if you don't have it in front of you. Right, I'll just go through the agenda really quickly. It's a very short one. I'll ask Sarah Davies to give a very brief update on where we are on the Bangladesh population movement. I will then give an update on the Madagascar plague operation. We will then take a look at the action points. We'll go through it very broadly. We're all very busy, and I don't think today is the best day to go through 22 action points one by one, but just broadly want to see if there's anyone that has any kind of update on any of action points against their name, and then basically any other business where you can ask questions on any topic that you like. So unless there's any preliminary questions or points that anyone wants to make, I'll turn it over to Sarah Davies to give us an update on the Bangladesh population movement response. Over to you, Sarah.
Okay, thanks, Will. So, yeah, obviously most people would be aware of a very challenging situation in Bangladesh. So well over 500,000 people now have crossed the border and in very cramped and difficult conditions. So the team on the ground decided with all the sectors to focus in one area with a sort of nominal targeted population in the beginning of around 100,000 people. But a lot of issues with space, so in terms of space for people to live, but also for sanitation, water supply. There were large program of the government in the beginning to put in shallow wells, which were not done very well, and people have been erecting their own kind of pit latrines. So a lot of shallow water that's been contaminated. So the water team has certainly been looking at shorter and longer term solutions. They've been piloting bucket chlorination, which many people have said would not be acceptable, but so far has had quite good results and will probably be likely to scale up. And then there is some medium term to longer term looking at beginning to do some deeper tube wells, which we believe should have reasonable quality of water. And then there's also been some work on pumping out of the shallow wells for chlorination in small tanks as a way to try and reach more people that way. On the sanitation side, there's perhaps even more challenges. So there's been some space found to do some pilot programming, thinking about having to collect sludge in buckets and moving that then to another site for treatment. But the initial trials have shown very fast filling up of buckets, and also there are still some questions about where treatment could be done on a larger scale. They've also been looking at washing shower facilities as well, and space has been at a premium. what's happening in the camps where people are settling is that, the situation is also changing every day. People are very mobile, and so the situation has to be very flexible. So at the moment, there's sort of a plan for roughly the next 3 months, but the appeal will be scaled up and starting to look at the longer term. The government is planning to move people to a very large camp. Initially, they were talking about moving 500,000 people there, but the size of the land is probably not enough really to accommodate that many people. And as there are more people still coming, there are likely to be a lot of people who may be eventually housed in that camp, which they had hoped to set up within 3 months, but that is probably an unrealistic time frame. But we expect within the host population and within additional people who won't fit into that camp that there will continue to be needs, and particularly as we have likelihood of monsoon coming, the need for contingency planning. People are very vulnerable in the state that they are in. So there is a lot to do on the WASH side.
Great.
Yep, that probably, just gives you the overview of where the situation is at the moment.
Thanks, Sarah. I mean, the only thing I would just throw in there is it's a very challenging situation for us, but it's a challenging situation for all of the different WASH actors on the ground. It's not like we're having any more problem than anyone else. I know the WASH cluster is very much struggling to come up with solutions, for sludge disposal. Other organizations are having just as much trouble in terms of access and figuring out what to do about the water as we are. So it's really across the board quite a difficult situation. We hope to see some progress on the water provision. We've just had some discussions today about moving forward on tube wells. We'd still like to see a bit more progress on a testing site for some of the sanitation solutions, from raised latrine or different kinds of latrines to the desludging and the sludge disposal. It's very complicated, and something that will last for some time. In terms of scale, very similar to Uganda, but in terms of complexity, far more difficult to respond. But the teams I think are doing a good job. Any questions from the small audience that we have about Bangladesh before we move on to Madagascar plague?
Hi, William. Just
Yes, go ahead.
a question. You talk about long-term solution for sanitation, and following up with our workshop on emergency sanitation this summer, would you consider some other type of option for sanitation, like treatment on site, like biodigester, for the longer term?
Yes, and I saw your email. Deborah. I just haven't a chance to come back to you on that question. I think what we've really tried to task the team. I know there's been a bit of communication confusion about this, but what we need more than anything is a secure, safe location there where we can test different things. As I said, testing different toilet configurations, different ways of emptying those toilets, and different ways of treating the waste. I think once they've secured that location, we're quite open to a variety of different technologies and approaches. The team came up with kind of their own idea on sludge treatment. We obviously have developed some approaches through the emergency sanitation project, where we have some ideas on how we would do this, and we would like to move forward on that. We're in talks with the Austrian Red Cross and some of their more technical resources on doing that, but I think we'd be open to other approaches as well. But what we need is a testing location where we can do these things under safe and easy to manage locations. Sarah, I don't know if from your side whether you've had any update on this idea of getting a pilot testing facility. I haven't seen. I saw some confusion about it last week, but I haven't seen much formal progress. I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that.
Just what I was reading in the handover documents, it said that they thought they had made progress on a site, so I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Yeah, and I mean we've been hearing that for a while. And the main thing is that space is such a critical issue there. There's very little space for anything. There's not really space for toilets, let alone a place to test toilets. The hope that we did have was that there was kind of a sort of buffer area between the road and the refugee areas. They had cleared off 100-meter area space between the road and them, and we thought we may be able to capitalize on that. But yeah, it's been a bit light on specific details on that progress, and it's been, I think, 2 weeks since they were given that task. So we'll continue to chase up on them. But to answer broadly, if people have other solutions and approaches, we're very open to that. But I think it would be best if we secure that location before we move too fast on anything like that. Any other questions from the National Societies online? And Marcus, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box or send me an email. Over. I thought I saw Marcus typing a second ago. I might give him a chance to finish that thought before we move on to plague in Madagascar. I mean, just a broader point, not just for the people who are online now, but for those who might be listening later. This is a big operation. Thanks, Marcus. It's a big operation. While we do have, the two ERUs there and the national societies that are already involved, there's plenty of work for everyone here, and so we are encouraging national societies to provide people. We're certainly encouraging people to think about contributing to the appeal, or national societies contributing to the appeal. These are going to be long-term activities, but very different. And maybe I'll explain one thing, just because we are in the ERU technical working group, and I think this will relate to some of the action points. This is a non-traditional deployment of the M40 and the MSM. The MSM was deployed only with human resources, not with equipment. The M40, the only equipment they brought was the lab testing equipment, which has been very useful because of the high level of contamination in the wells that are there. So this is a new way of working for us. It presents a lot of problems in terms of how does an ERU work when it doesn't have its equipment? How does it work within the Federation finance system? All of those issues that we discussed in Madrid about operational versus running costs just become that much more critical and complicated when the deploying teams only have local procurement to rely on to deliver their activities. So it is complicated, but I think it's something that we need to get better at. It's something that's going to be coming down the pipeline more and more. These kind of deployments where it's not necessarily necessary to bring a bunch of Oxfam tanks. We need to come up with local solutions, but the expertise and the personnel from the ERUs are still extremely critical and useful. So I think we're going to try to learn from this as much as we can. The working group on the different deployment methodologies, I'm hoping we'll learn a lot from these two deployments that will inform that work on new modules and new operating modalities. Sarah, is there anything else you want to say about RDRT and their participation in this before we move on?
Just to mention that we have two RDRT who are completely integrated into the two teams on the ground. We'd hoped to have a third, but because of visa issues, that didn't happen. But yeah, again, it's kind of the first time. We don't have the MOU signed yet, and so there was a bit of confusion about that in the beginning, but I think this is the way that we're going to want to work more and more, and we will continue to do more rotations of the RDRT, and in the same way they will work together in both the sanitation and the water teams. Just as a way to make sure that we have plenty of hands on deck, because it is a big response.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I can't stress that enough. This is going to be the new way of working. Hopefully the MOUs will be finalized and signed very soon, but that notwithstanding, we are going to be seeing a lot more integration of RDRT and ERU personnel in the field, both in operations and hopefully in training as well. So I think that's a good thing. We'll have to see how we can document how this process went. There were a couple, sort of management line issues in Nepal, of just starting up activities and rotations and that kind of complication. Nothing sort of personal, more just sort of how the system was set up. So it'd be good to see how we've moved on since the Nepal operation, and how things went in Bangladesh once we kind of see how this goes. If there's no other comments on Bangladesh, I'll just leave it with one, just to say the same thing once again. This is a huge operation. It's extremely complicated in terms of the access, in terms of the sort of the technical nature of the WASH work that we have to do there, because of the local conditions in terms of the soil, the aquifers, and the just complete lack of space. It being a refugee, a population movement resulting from a conflict. It's obviously very unpredictable. It's not like an earthquake where every day is a little bit better than the day before. It's still unpredictable whether there'll be increasing influxes. We're very committed to this operation. It was as a movement. It was just raised to red level in our own kind of parlance. That means it's the highest level of focus from the organization. Because we've reached a certain level in terms of appeal coverage, it is expected that the appeal will be revised and expanded. The word was 30 million, and we hope that WASH will continue to be a large part of that because we think that there's a lot of work to be done. We will be advocating in-house to make sure that WASH is still a big area of focus. So the ERUs will obviously eventually rotate out, but the operation will continue, and we'll have to see how we can continue to support the operation. Moving on to the other big operation, one that we didn't really need, given it's been a very busy 2 months, particularly with the hurricanes in the Caribbean, but also a few earthquakes and volcanoes bubbling away. We didn't really need a plague outbreak right now, but we have one. This is a little bit different. We've seen plague in Madagascar before. In the past, it was almost exclusively bubonic plague. They're spread by fleas that were usually carried by rats. We've dealt with that before. The National Society has a pretty good track record in that response. They were relatively small scale, though big for the National Society. Off the top of my head, I can't remember if those were appeals or whether we dealt with those with DREF. But I know, again, the National Society has been active in plague response before. We did support with vector control training. The Mentor initiative, that was one of the first kind of interactions between the Red Cross movement and Mentor. Mentor deployed a trainer to help the Malagasy Red Cross prepare for plague response. What's different this time is that it's now pneumonic plague. It seems to be the primary means of, or primary issue that we're dealing with. So that means person to person. It's not technically airborne. It's sort of droplet based, which is, it's a different classification, but it is a different form of transmission than, say, Ebola, which required a lot more physical contact. It is a different level of, respiration risk there. This is looking a lot like Ebola in a lot of key different ways. First of all, this will be a largely health-led response. We're having discussions in-house of why that is, and I can go into that in a little bit of detail. It's very disease-specific when we decide whether or not WASH should be what level of kind of leadership and involvement we should be in. For diseases like meningitis or measles or Ebola, we feel that those are primarily health interventions, and WASH provides a support role, either providing WASH in treatment centers or just making as many of our resources available as possible. Use our land cruiser, use our trained volunteers, use our people in other capacities, things like that. That's definitely how we felt about Ebola. It was because the control measures around Ebola were not really all that WASH based. We felt it should be a health-led operation with WASH and support. Cholera would obviously be very different because the interventions in the community are very much WASH-based, and so we would have much more leadership there. Plague is a little bit of a mix of the two. In many ways, it's like Ebola, and we will react in many ways like Ebola in terms of supporting the plague treatment centers, the PTCs, and safe and dignified burial and other things. What makes it a bit different is the vector control component. And so we've added a sixth pillar. If those of you might remember the 5 pillars from Ebola, I'm not going to list those because I'm afraid I might miss one, but basically safe and dignified burial, community engagement, contact tracing, psychosocial support, and clinical treatment. I may have gotten all 5 there. We're adding a 6th pillar, which is vector control, and WASH will be very much engaged in that. So we are a little bit more engaged than we were in Ebola, but still we still feel this is very much a health-led emergency. What's happening now is that there is a FACT team on the ground who are making arrangements for the startup of the operation. Um, um, so that's happening now. There's still a lot of negotiation with the government. As of the weekend, we had just gotten confirmation that we were allowed to set up plague treatment centers. On, I think it was either Friday or Saturday, they were pushing back on that and trying to use their normal hospitals, which would have resulted in a lot of complications. But we do have approval now for actually setting up standalone PTCs. The team now on the ground is looking for locations to help with that setup. So what we envision is something similar to one last complication is, and very similar to Ebola, the national societies that would normally support this kind of operation with ERUs and funding are at the moment not particularly well funded by their governments. It's not yet a priority for their governments, and so we were not able to secure a full deployment of a health ERU. We had hoped to deploy a field hospital, partly because the system is quite tapped out with the Caribbean and Bangladesh taking up a lot of the resources. The Norwegian Red Cross is in the process of opening their hospital in Bangladesh, and we've got a lot of health facilities deployed into the Caribbean islands. So we're a little bit on the back foot in terms of capacity, but there's also, this is not yet a priority for governments. So what has happened is that the IFRC has, by approval from the Secretary General, released a 1 million Swiss franc loan from the DREF that will allow us to set up. Some of that money is going to field running costs, but it's also going into purchasing equipment from the German Red Cross because they have equipment but not funding. So we are using IFRC funds to compensate the German Red Cross for their equipment, which will be deployed in the coming days. We have a WASH person as part of the FACT from the French Red Cross. That person had good experience from Ebola, so we were very happy that the French Red Cross were able to make Cyril available to the operation. We are also waiting on a final confirmation from the Mentor Initiative. They will send in 2 trainers to help train the Red Cross volunteers on proper plague vector control response. They will also stay an extra week to help us with the planning for the response operation outside the fence, flea and rat control activities, household disinfection, etc. The appeal is very imminent. I gave my technical comments at 8:30 last night. The idea was that it would be launched today, but there seems to be another delay because of some unrelated issue. But we do expect the appeal to be released very soon. There was a partner call last week, and there did seem to be a lot of interest, but the levels of funding are still unclear. So just, sorry, this is a bit of a monologue. I apologize. The last thing I'll say is that in terms of WASH, we really need good people who were involved in Ebola treatment centers, either as WASH people or IPC, Infection Prevention and Control. If you have people that you deployed from your national society to Ebola, who might be available to go to Madagascar plague, we would very much appreciate those kind of resources because we think the operating environment will be fairly similar. The last thing I'll say is French is obviously very prioritized. Most of the activities are done in French, but there may be some flexibility on that inside the plague treatment centers. I'll stop there and open the floor to any questions you might have about plague in Madagascar.
Yes, William, can you hear me?
Go ahead, yes.
Yeah, just on Madagascar, a couple of questions on my side. Do you have any ideas about the material from the German Red Cross? You say a couple of days. You know that we sent 4 people Saturday. So they're on the field now, and I know that they have started the evaluation. Just for, as we are in contact with them on daily basis, would be interesting to have an idea of a couple of days. It means end of this week, or it means middle of this week. Do you have any idea of that?
It's a good question. As I said, on Saturday we had a joint task force call, and at that time the dispatch of the equipment was put on hold because the government had not given approval for standalone field clinics, and so they were trying to, what the plan at that time was to use existing wards of their existing hospital system for plague response, and so therefore they didn't want any external equipment. The Malagasy Red Cross was able to lobby and influence the government to go ahead with the opening, and so then the go-ahead was then given for the dispatch. That said, so I'm afraid I don't have a good answer for you of exactly what day, but I think I would say this week. But that said, and I communicated with Cyril by email last on Friday, but I never heard a response back. If you're in communication with them, you can say, while the equipment is ongoing or is imminent, there is no WASH equipment included in the equipment coming from the German Red Cross. So all of the WASH infrastructure in the PTCs will have to be local procurement, which is basically what we did in Ebola. The only piece of equipment that we are bringing from the German Red Cross that is relevant for WASH is these small barrel incinerators. We're bringing 2 of those. But all of the pipe work, all of the taps, all of the water tanks, those will have to be procured locally. The chlorine will be coming in externally. We've put in an order for 500 tons of NADCC. I don't have a good idea of when that will be on the ground. But if you can communicate with the fact WASH, because I have not had luck getting in touch with them, if you can say plan 100% local procurement in terms of the PTC. Over.
Okay. Thanks. Pretty surprised that we did not send a minimum of WASH materials. I know for Ebola that we mainly use water infrastructure, especially in Guinea. The thing is, I don't know where would be placed the ECRC. And if there is no water supply system nearby, would be quite complex situation. And I'm wondering about storage capacity, but let's see at the local level if there is materials available there. Okay, for the incinerator as well, just for me, it's the emergency incinerator developed by German Red Cross that you plan to send, or the bigger one?
So two things answering both of your points. In the Sierra Leone context, the vast majority of the water infrastructure for the ETCs was done with local procurements. So local polyurethane pipe, local plastic roto tanks. There was some issue on some of the connections, some of the PE connections. Locally were not very good, and we actually did procure them from Germany. We may have to do that again. But all of the taps and everything else in terms of water infrastructure, the latrine slabs were cast in place. All of that stuff was done locally. I'm not sure how the French Red Cross did it in Guinea, but for the 2 IFRC Ebola treatment centers in Sierra Leone, we did all of that locally. One reason for that, just to be very blunt and frank about this, is that we are working on a bit of a budget at the moment. I still think that this is going to grow quite big. We've already had 1 case confirmed outside of country in Comoros, and so as you know, I think with Donald Trump and all of the other things going on, the media's capacity to absorb plague has so far been limited, but I don't expect that to last. I expect relatively soon there will be a lot more funding available, but at the moment we're kind of counting the pennies, and so we have a certain amount of money and we have to pay this money to the German Red Cross. So the German Red Cross did make some equipment available, some tap stands and bladders basically, and a water treatment plant, but we made the decision not to go for that in order to save money and go for local procurement. We've not made a final selection of site yet, but there was a place today that was near the airport, and the word was it did have running water. So you would obviously have to have storage, you would have to have chlorination and all those things, but there was a source of running water at one of the sites, at least, that's been identified so far. But yes, it will be a challenge for Cyril, but we'll support in any way we can on that. But that's the best we can do. On the second issue of which incinerator, I can try to find the spec, but they offered their mobile incinerator, which German Red Cross said that they used quite a bit in Ebola. We used was it a Spanish Red Cross incinerator? I think. Anyway, that incinerator was not used very effectively in the Kinema ETC. I remember when I was there in April of 2015, they were giving it a safe and dignified burial because it had not been used. But these barrel incinerators, it's basically just a steel barrel, and on top is a very high-powered fan. It's so quite simple to use, and also quite safe because you don't need to be wearing PPE near it, and which was the big issue for the other incinerator. Those are the two barrel incinerators. So I'm not sure if that's the emergency incinerator you're talking about, but I can find you the spec. It's basically a barrel with a big fan on top. That's pretty much the technology.
Yeah, I know because I've been trained by the German Red Cross, so I'm quite aware about their incinerator, mobile one.
So you would use a burn pit for most of the PPE and all those other things, and the burn barrel for specialized things like needles.
Yeah.
Over.
Right. Just wondering that the capacity would be too less based on the needs. But do you want us to talk with the Veolia Foundation and ask them if there is a capacity to provide for free as a donation Aqua 500, the small needs?
I'm interested in that. I think, but I would wait for the request from the field. But if Cyril sees a need for that level of treatment, yes. My only concern would be the capacity. I mean, we would just need to compare the large amount in terms of water needs, and whether that would match up with your unit. But other than that, I'm not going to say no to a donation for a water treatment plant. No, but let's see what Cyril finds on the ground.
Okay, so what I could propose is I start to talk with Veolia Foundation, just saying, okay, might be a possibility, just wait evaluation from the field, and if we identify that there is it's relevant to have such a water treatment unit, so let's talk further on.
Could you communicate that with the field with me and copy? Over.
Yeah, to whom on the field?
Cyril.
The fax?
Yep.
Okay, Stefan. Okay, I will.
No, yeah, with Cyril, yeah?
Cyril, yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Just to cut out the middleman, if you send that message to him with me and copy. Like I said, I communicated with him on Friday, but I have to his Gmail, but I haven't heard back. I think their official fact emails were coming online over the weekend. We just need to get that from the search desk. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm sorry for that. What about is that a possibility if we did not receive yet the materials to also support Malgache Red Cross on maybe doing appropriate training, refreshment training for IPC's activities, for instance?
Yes, so we have a woman named Rebecca Stretch, who is an IPC expert. Her full-time job is for working for Public Health England, but she has a relationship with her employer that allows her to deploy to the field. She's worked with WHO and others. We're very lucky that we are able to get her. I believe she's flying to the field tomorrow, so we will have an IPC lead, but I think the assumption is that we will need as many people as possible with IPC experience to come through this operation. The case numbers are going up on quite a alarming rate. So we're scaling up now, but we expect this to be bigger quite soon. So yes, I think both for French Red Cross in particular, just because of the language, but all other national societies who have people on their roster register who may have gone in whatever role, medical, IPC, or WATSAN, we called it last time, now we'd call it WASH. Those three profiles are very much desired for this. Just a quick note on the difference between WATSAN and IPC. This is something that causes confusion. If you work for MSF, you are either medical or you are WATSAN. That's their term. That's fine because their WATSAN pool is primarily a medical-based pool. They have a lot of experience of working in clinical settings. We obviously do have people with that experience, but the vast majority of our WASH personnel do not have specialized clinical setting experience and training. At the same time, there are a lot of people on our overall rosters in all walks of Red Cross and Red Crescent Life that do have a very good IPC background. Maybe they work in a hospital, maybe they're a paramedic, something like that. So we wanted to create this kind of third JD, this job description of a different role, which would then allow for a much broader perspective of people. So we have three basic roles in these treatment centers: medical, IPC, and WASH. So WASH people can be IPC, that's not a problem, but at this point we would prefer if they had experience from Ebola.
Okay. Anyway, Cyril, I've been working on Ebola on either ATC and outreach activity. So I think it's a good resources to work with your colleague Rebecca, not wrong, for IPC. Another question, many of the expatriates sent to Ebola response in Guinea for the French Red Cross were either ERU or expatriates. Shall we also ask them to their availability? And if yes, the Federation would accept to send people that are not ERU but have experience on Ebola, and especially IPC, for instance?
Yes, as I said before, this will be similar to Ebola in terms of how we bring in personnel, because these people would be working in a PTC. That need for kind of Red Cross experience and things like that is much less critical. Obviously, they'll have to sign code of conduct and all those things, but I think in terms of the type of people we'll be looking for, we'll be looking at their technical capacity first, and their ERU training or other things, or even their impact or work or all those kind of Red Cross things. I think are going to be a lot less critical, just like in Ebola.
Okay, fine. It's okay on my side. Thank you very much, William.
Thank you, Charles. Any other questions from the field about the plague in Madagascar? Okay, we'll leave that there for now. As I said, the appeal will be imminent, so you'll be able to see the specific plan of action very soon. If there's nothing else, I'll move very quickly to the action points that we had at the ERU Technical Working Group meeting in Spain in June of this year. We had 22 action points, which is not uncommon for us. What was uncommon was that my name or Federation employee's name was not behind every single action point, and that was to me a very good progress. So some of these are kind of ongoing things I need to liaise with the surge desk on, and that's still ongoing. Some of these are dependent on kind of annual reporting things, so not worth really going into now. There were quite a few things around the Uganda M40 deployment in particular, some very technical things around pumping curves and pumping specs and things like that. I don't think the Swedish Red Cross has joined the call, so unfortunately they cannot tell us how they're doing with some of that. But hopefully, I know that Sven from Swedish Red Cross went to visit both Butyl Products and Austrian Red Cross, so I know that there's been some progress on that, but we'll have to get an update on another time. Interesting, there was a long action point about the difference between operational and running costs, which is obviously a big issue over the years. I think that one is really coming to the fore on Bangladesh. It was kind of a raw subject in June in Madrid because we'd had some issues around that in Uganda. I don't know if Sarah knows of anything. I know that from our side we are increasingly concerned that Federation Finance is not necessarily getting involved enough in emergency response. That has been brought to the attention to both the DM team here and to the Office of the Secretary General. In the last 2 years, there's been 4 FACT deployments for for FACT finance, and I'm not always convinced that the regional finance is necessarily stepping in on that. But anyway, I think this is an issue for Bangladesh, but what I would say is that we did have a partner call before the deployment where the Spanish and British on the MSM side and the Swedish and Austrian on the M40 side, we did discuss this in general of what the way of working would be, that we would expect that national studies would contribute to the appeal and that there would be local procurement. As far as I know, that's working quite well. I don't know if Sarah has anything to add to that.
Just well, just to say that on the ground there's been a little bit of confusion about perhaps where the cutoff should be with the money that the ERU teams have brought with them, and then sort of switching over to what's been pledged. So I know, for example, the Austrians have pledged money, and part of it is earmarked for the WASH activities. But we'll hopefully just sort that out very soon, just between the operational team on the ground. This kind of cut off between when things start to move over to the appeal, if the ERU teams have brought money with them, that's obviously something that still needs a little bit more clarity for the people who are deploying on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is always going to be, it will never be completely smooth, let's be honest, but I think it's an improvement over Uganda, where there was kind of different expectations, and I think the idea of having a call before the deployment, just to make it clear what the expectations are. We have done that. I think that's a good first start to a better way of working. But there will always be kind of kinks in the process and things to deal with. But such as life and emergency work. I don't know. Before I move on that, I don't know if seeing as how we have the Spanish and the British on the line, I don't know if you have anything to, and I know that particularly with the British, it was a big topic of discussion in Madrid. I don't know if you have anything to add on that particular issue, anything you've heard from Bangladesh. Over.
No update from our side.
Raquel, have you anything to add on from the Spanish record? I know it's an MSM, and you're the focal point for the M15, but I didn't know. Actually, I think Raquel has dropped off the call. I don't see her on the list. Anyway, if anyone listening to this recording, if you're deploying National Society, so Sarah or Christina Castillo-Laya, if you've heard anything, or George, if you listen to this, if you've heard anything about it in the field around the operational running cost and working through the appeal, please share that. As I said before, this is going to be a way of working we expect to see more often, and we'd like to get it right, even if we know it will never be perfect. Right, just going through, I see one action point, an easy one in theory, but it allows me to talk about kind of a bigger issue. Everyone to bring solar lights to the July workshop. I think I was the only one who brought a solar light. But anyway, we did have a workshop around the emergency sanitation project. We were very kindly hosted by the British Red Cross at their warehouse facility in the Midlands. We had really good participation from quite a few people in the Red Cross movement. It was a very wide range of experience. I mean, we didn't really do much selection. People were invited, and we kind of let almost everyone who wanted to come. We blocked one supplier. Other than that, we were quite open to people coming. We had, I think, 19 people in the end. A really nice mix of good Red Cross field people and process engineers and academics and kind of everything in between. We need to finalize the report. I had hoped for a bit more input from some of the participants on that, but we will finalize that. What has made this more complicated was that the next step was supposed to be a kind of simulated deployment in sort of a more peaceful, quiet place. However, with the scenario in Bangladesh, it's very possible we will try some things out there. But again, that's dependent on all the issues I spoke of previously. So the ESP is still kind of full steam ahead. And thanks, as always, thanks again to the British Red Cross for hosting that event in late July. And thanks to everyone who was able to attend or send people there. So I'm just going through these real quick, and I'll turn it over to the field. To the audience. A few things about next year's meeting. A few things on vector control equipment that we still need to finalize and make some decisions on. And point number 22, the virtual technical working group, to talk about things in sometime in October. I'm happy to say that we've achieved that action point. I will stop there, and if there's anyone who would like to add anything on that, over. Raquel is back.
Yeah, sorry, I was with the microphone silence.
That's okay. I think it looks like Deborah and Claire may have just dropped out. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but it sounded like they wanted to tell me that it was. Anyway, anything from anyone else's side on any progress on action points?
Yeah, from Spanish Red Cross, we are still working on the household water treatment training. We have like 5-6 people working on the group, and we are doing the training from ICRC, and also other training, online training, which is made by WHO. It's 5-week lessons, and I think it's really interesting. So we expect that by the end of the year, we have a draft of the design.
Can you sorry, when was that again that you expected to have that draft?
Yeah, by the end of December.
Okay, great. And once that's done, we can talk about when we. I think that was one of the action points of when we would expect to actually do that workshop. Yeah. Okay. Great.
So
thanks for that, Raquel.
Okay.
Charles, you weren't able to join us, unfortunately, because of the competing priority with the training. But I don't know. I don't think there's anyone else on the line. But I don't know, Charles, if you had any questions about any of the action points or anything else to add.
Not especially. I'm just had just read something that I was interesting to have more information on. Give me 2 seconds that I go through the action point.
No problem.
No, that's fine. I will be interested by the training on the household water treatment system, but later on. Are you interested to have a small feedback on Caribbean response or not?
Yeah.
In a second, let's just wrap up the action points. But yes, I would very much like to hear about that. Maybe just a few things on going in the house. We will proceed again with these new modules, these ways of working. I think very much what we're looking at in Bangladesh, at least on that rural water supply rehabilitation module, very much fits that. So we'd like to learn from that. The surge optimization process is still ongoing. For those who are not aware what that is, the surge optimization process is what used to be called the Global Tools Review. Now that review is completed, it's now been turned into the surge optimization. One of the big things that we need to do as part of that is some work on competency. We're using our colleagues in KL to help us with that. Sarah launched a consultancy to review the training strategy in her region, but we tacked on to that some work on competency, and we hope to talk to a few people about perhaps funding that. But basically, a more competency framework, a more competency-based system for our surge mechanisms, we hope is ongoing, and that's kind of related to some of these action points. I don't think there was any other thing huge that was discussed then that has come up. I'm probably forgetting something big, but no. If there's nothing else on action points, we can go into AOB. And Charles, I would love to hear about what's going on in the Caribbean. But if they've probably left the call, but if our British colleagues come back on the call, perhaps they can give us some similar feedback. Over to you, Charles. Charles, you still are on mute. I'm not sure if you're able to hear me.
Yes, sorry. Oh, excuse me. Just to let you know that one water treatment plant unit had been sent to Dominic for the response on WASH, in addition to the existing one that we provided in 2015 after Eureka response. And on top of that, there is request from the federation to add additional wash material, especially, and we are looking at the material that we are using for our national operation in Saint-Martin, which is a French territory, divided with our colleague of Netherlands. So here we are very briefly, and there is a huge need on WASH in Dominique, but not only in Dominique, in also Antigua and all these small islands that I don't remember the name. So we are looking to see what the materials from the IRMA operation in national territory, French national territory, that can be now sent to the different islands, especially Dominique. Really briefly. That's enough, or do you want me to go?
No, that's enough from my side, unless there's any questions from anyone else. Okay.
Okay. And just to let you know that we are in close coordination with the Netherlands Red Cross, especially on Saint Martin, but not only.
Okay, great. Maybe just a plug from the Netherlands Red Cross. I'd hope that they would join the call. They have something called they are managing something called the DSS, the Dutch Surge System, I think is what that is. Basically, it's a way of getting people from different walks of life within the Netherlands, very technical people, into emergency operations. The UN, UNHCR in particular, is using this quite a bit. We, as Red Cross, to my knowledge, have not really tapped into this very much, at least not on WASH, though the Swedish Red Cross is in discussion with the Netherlands Red Cross as we speak to do that. So in these kind of larger operations where we're really, I don't want to say desperate, but we really need people and we need a lot of hands, particularly when we need someone with a very niche technical skill, I think it is something that is something we should use more often. I know that Sarah Anderson from Swedish Red Cross is in touch with them now, and hopefully we can get some experience from that. But it does seem to be a good way of getting good technical people into the field very quickly. So maybe just a plug from that for any national society who might struggle to, meet a third rotation of an ERU or meet a specific technical need. Like I say, I promised I would not go through all 22 action points, and I won't. I don't think there's too much more to update. Oh, there was one last thing, and again, this was very relevant to the ERU Technical Working Group meeting. We are finalizing, and by finalizing I mean actually publishing, the hygiene promotion in emergencies guidelines. Off the top of my head, I don't exactly know what the publishing schedule on that is, but quite soon. And the rollout plan, which is supported by several national societies and includes a lot of different ways of rollout. Training, yes, but also other means of getting the IHP guidelines to be picked up by the movement. That's ongoing. So Mariama Sifa, who finished her rotational assignment with us in September, was very instrumental in getting that to the finish line. And I think it's now with the publishing team. So we hope to have the final product out very soon. So we did. I bring this up here because we did have a third day of hygiene promotion to discuss the HP guidelines at the meeting in June. Sorry, I've got a general question from Marcus. General question: is the RDRT ERU MOU a global MOU or only for certain regions? Is it only for certain PNS, RDRT, regional things? Sarah might be able to answer this better than I am. My understanding is it was within individual regions and only with PNSs who signed it. Am I correct in that, Sarah?
Yeah, it's drafted. The one that we have here is drafted just for this region, and it has been submitted for legal, and they want to put in a few legal clauses. So that's where it's at.
Yeah. So it's still not there yet. I think most between the technical teams, between WASH advisors and national societies and our side, we're quite happy with it. But yes, as usual, the lawyers are doing their work on it. It needed to be regional because the regions are very different in terms of how they deploy, how they pay, all of these things with RDRT. so it did have to be regional. But I think the more the merrier is certainly the feeling. I know the Spanish Red Cross has been involved in this, and the British Red Cross as well. I think it was initially as kind of a Swedish-led initiative, but it has expanded beyond Sweden and beyond the Asia Pacific region. So I think there is certainly room for Norwegian Red Cross or whoever else to join that process. Okay. Great, thanks, Marcus. Unless there's any more points for any other business, I'll talk about the next meeting. But any other comments or questions from the group?
I've got a really quick question, Will. So this is Claire.
Oh, good. I'm glad you guys are still there. You kind of disappeared from my screen, but I'm glad you're still there. Great.
Now we're back up. Just a really quick question on the vector control. So we sent around the vector control focal point persons vec and got comments back and then sent a background. And I think the only remaining question was, is this like going to be a pooled resource or actually part of the team, or how would it be managed? And so it would be good to just get an idea on that, because I know Emma from our side is going to try and start contacting specialist organisations quite soon. So just to understand how you're envisaging that would be managed.
Okay. I think my understanding from my memory of the action point at the time was that each national society should kind of look in their own backyard and see what kind of vector control specialist support that they could identify and use. I think it will probably, to be very practical about it, Claire, will depend on how many national societies are able to do that. So if both the British and the Spanish, are able to do that, then I think it would be more of a pooled resource, and we would then decide, well, if it's a Spanish language thing, or if there's a particular special, for whatever reason, we would choose which resource to tap on the day. But which is perhaps more likely, let's be honest, if the British Red Cross is able to identify that support in country and maybe a bit faster, then there's going to be a bit more reliance on that. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but I think in terms of the management of the technical support, it would be very much as we always manage any kind of technical support through the ERU technical working group. We put out feelers to see who has the capacity to take something on, and depending on, we might give that to be a working group, or if it's an operation, it might be part of the ERU deployment. It can take different forms. Again, I'm not sure if that answers your question on the specifics of it or not. Over.
Okay, great. So it's really kind of just quite an informal system of just knowing who's out there and having the contacts we can draw down on. Yeah,
I think that's how we've always kind of dealt with it. Some of it is kind of more, there's a lot of people who obviously know how to run, the M40 or whatever. That's a more broad capacity. But for instance, we've been kind of relying a bit more on the Austrian Red Cross lately on sludge management, because they have a few, both in their headquarters and also connections with do volunteers, some really specialized sludge disposal people. They're not the only ones, but they seem to have a few more. So I think it will be informal. It will depend on who has time and perhaps other considerations. But yeah, I don't think we'll make an MOU or from our side, I don't think we'll make it a formal arrangement. But we'd be perfectly happy for you to do that. But then we would then tap that resource as and when needed. We still have our contract with Mentor Initiative, as I said in June, and I'll say again, I don't want to only rely on them, and there are some issues, both in terms of cost considerations, but also some other issues that we've kind of discussed informally of Mentor not being sort of a perfect organization. But we do want to keep that connection, because we do feel it is a resource that we want to keep on board. But we would like to broaden the amount of technical support we have on vector control.
Thanks very much.
Okay, if there's not any other business that anyone wants to raise, we will close the meeting. I will figure out how to share this recording, I hope. It's the first time I've done this. In terms of the next meeting, I would recommend that we have a meeting in Q1 of 2018. I'll make that the only action point of this meeting. we'll basically share the recording and figure out how to share the recording, and try to schedule a meeting sometime early next year. It'll be the similar format, similar technology probably, and then I'm hoping by then we will have confirmation of when and where the next technical working group meeting will take place. There was some discussion with our health colleagues of one very exciting idea, but I need to confirm that before we want to share that. So just kind of watch this space. But hopefully by Q1 of next year, we would know the time and location of the next meeting, the face-to-face meeting, and also whether there's any other meetings going on, advisor meetings or etc., other ad hoc meetings. But let's just say the only action point will be that we will have another conference call sometime in the first quarter of 2018. If there's nothing else, I'll close the call, and thank you so much for those of us who joined. For those of you who weren't able to, I hope the recording is useful. If you've got any questions, you know where to find me, and see you all hopefully very soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Bye.